The case of Kesha Brown, a cold case reopened. On a day in October 2004, the lifeless remains of 28-year-old Kesha Brown were found submerged in the bathtub of her residence located at 700 East Flamingo Road. The medical examiner's report confirmed that Kesha had been physically attacked and murdered by an unidentified individual. At the time, witnesses told investigators they had seen a man entering and leaving her apartment. The man had arrived in a red sedan, entered her home, and was later seen leaving with a duffel bag in his possession. Despite these witness accounts and the collection of forensic evidence from the scene, detectives were unable to identify or apprehend a suspect. Fast forward to August 2022, Detective Dan Long of the Homicide Division reopened the investigation into Kesha's death and requested additional DNA analysis using evidence recovered during her autopsy. As Long sifted through the details of the case, he began noticing unsettling similarities between Kesha's murder and several others he had worked on in 2005. Upon deeper review, a disturbing pattern began to surface. Each of the victims had been assaulted and murdered in a disturbingly consistent manner, their bodies arranged with chilling similarity. This led Detective Long to strongly suspect that these homicides could be connected and potentially committed by the same person, Norman Flowers. Back in October 2008, Norman Flowers had been found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment for the 2005 murder of 18-year-old Sheila Quarles, who was the daughter of his former girlfriend. Before taking Sheila's life, Flowers had already served time in prison, having been incarcerated and released on parole twice before. Shockingly, he committed the murder less than 3 weeks, just 20 days, after being released from prison. Then in 2011, Flowers was charged once again with 2 additional counts of first-degree murder for the killings of 45-year-old Marley Cott and 24-year-old Rena Gonzalez. Marley's body had been found on May 3, 2005, in her apartment on Russell Road. Investigators determined she had been sexually assaulted prior to her death, and DNA evidence linked directly to Flowers was discovered at the scene. Just 8 hours after Marley's body was found, Rena Gonzalez was also discovered dead in the same apartment complex. She had been strangled with a telephone cord. Authorities now believe that Kesha Brown may have been the first woman murdered by Flowers, and that the other 3 victims, Quarles, Cott, and Gonzalez, were killed during the early part of 2005. To avoid facing the death penalty, Flowers entered an Alford plea in 2011. By doing so, he did not admit guilt, but acknowledged that prosecutors had enough evidence to likely secure a conviction. In exchange, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. I would say, based on every definition, he qualifies as a serial killer, said Lieutenant Jason Johansson of the Metropolitan Police Department. In February 2023, an arrest warrant was issued for Flowers on charges of open murder and assault with a deadly weapon. He is currently held at High Desert State Prison, serving 3 life sentences, and is awaiting trial for the newly filed charges. Kalia Brown, Kesha's daughter, expressed that the uncertainty surrounding her mother's fate had caused her immense pain over the years. She shared her heartfelt gratitude to the law enforcement team for their relentless dedication to solving her mother's case and finally bringing justice to light. The case of Kesha Brown now stands as a painful reminder of the lives lost and a tribute to the perseverance of those determined to seek justice, even decades later. Michael Sharpe, unmasking a predator after decades of silence. On June 3, 1984, a 25-year-old woman in Bloomfield experienced a nightmare. She awoke in her home to find an unknown man standing silently by her bed. The assailant had broken in through her sliding glass door. He aggressively placed his hand over her mouth, threatening to shoot both her and her roommate if she uttered a word. What followed was a horrific assault. Before leaving, the attacker severed the telephone lines, ransacked the house for valuables, and even took the liberty of drinking a beer from her fridge. Just 23 days later, on June 26, 1984, another woman, aged 30, was startled awake to find herself blindfolded and tied up. Her attacker had entered through the sliding door, jumped on her, and began rummaging through her possessions. He forced her to lead him downstairs to retrieve her purse, then viciously assaulted her. Before fleeing, he again cut off the communication lines, thoroughly searched the home and disturbingly asked if there was any good food in the refrigerator. Nearly 5 days after that, on July 1st, 1984, a 24-year-old woman from Windsor was attacked in a similar manner. An armed intruder had entered through her sliding door and pointed a gun at her head. She was blindfolded and subjected to a terrifying assault. The man forced her into a chair while he looted the home. Like before, he disconnected her phone lines, tampered with the clocks, and turned on all the faucets to mask the sounds of his escape. Then, on July 24th, 1984, in Rocky Hill, a 24-year-old woman was lying in bed beside her 2-year-old daughter when she heard the sliding door click open. To her horror, she came face to face with a masked man aiming a gun directly at her. Realizing what was about to occur, she begged the intruder to allow her to move her child into another room. He agreed. After settling her daughter down, the woman was brought back to her room, where she too became another victim of his brutal crimes. For years, detectives pored over these cases, interviewing hundreds of potential suspects, from salespeople and workers to nearby residents and travelers frequenting Interstate 91 and Route 9, both near the crime scenes. Yet, their efforts yielded no solid leads. As time passed, the trail grew cold. However, investigators always suspected a single perpetrator was responsible for all four incidents. This theory was supported by similarities in the attacker's voice, behavior, and the geographic locations of the crimes, each near I-91 and Route 9. In April 2003, forensic testing confirmed those suspicions. DNA analysis revealed all four attacks were linked to the same genetic profile. Unfortunately, despite this critical discovery, no match was found for many years. Then, in 2020, the victims were contacted with astonishing news. The man who had irrevocably altered their lives now had a name and a face. Authorities had turned to a non-law enforcement genealogy service, using publicly accessible DNA databases to track him down. That man was Michael Sharpe. Sharpe, a Marlborough resident, had once served as CEO of the organization overseeing Jumoke Academy, a free charter school in Hartford. He was identified as a suspect through investigative genetic genealogy. Investigators initially collected his DNA from discarded items outside his home, followed by a cheek swab. Both samples matched the DNA found at all four crime scenes. In November 2020, Michael Moran Sharpe, then 69 years old, was arrested in Marlborough, Connecticut. By November 2022, he stood convicted on 4 counts of first-degree kidnapping, as well as 4 counts of kidnapping during the commission of a felony. Due to the statute of limitations for sexual assault expiring in 1989, Sharpe could not be tried for those specific charges. Still, all 4 women testified at his trial, though they chose to remain anonymous. 3 appeared in court, while the 4th testified via video link. Forensic experts testified that the likelihood of the DNA belonging to anyone other than Sharpe was 1 in 7 billion. Throughout the proceedings, Sharpe showed little emotion. He repeatedly denied guilt and insisted he had no memory of committing the crimes, claiming memory loss about the 1980s in general. "I just don't know how I could have done something so terrible," he told the court. His family members also addressed the judge, pleading for a lighter sentence. In January 2023, inside a Hartford courtroom, 71-year-old Michael Sharpe received a sentence of 72 years in prison. Judge Frank M. Dadabo delivered the ruling, mandating a minimum of 40 years behind bars. "You match the profile of someone who preys on others without remorse," the judge said. He likened the trauma suffered by the victims to life sentences of their own, and he branded Sharpe a ruthless predator. "We are grateful these 4 women finally have some form of closure," said Supervisory Assistant State's Attorney John Fahey, head of the cold case unit who prosecuted the case. "This sentencing sends a strong message. The cold case unit will never stop fighting for justice, for victims and their families alike."